If you actually think about the subject we're discussing, we have major demographic pressures, the changing world of work, the state of the existing pension systems, the inefficiencies in financial markets. It is clear that we actually face a number of major challenges if we do want to create sustainable pension systems for the European Union. And many people, including myself, would argue that major reform is needed in our pensions system. Now, of course, we know that the longer we leave reform, the worse the problem will get. If we don't act now, then the problems simply build up over time. But we also know from bitter experience, actually, that if you introduce policy too quickly, then you risk making serious errors of judgment in policy formulation. So I think the real challenge here we face today is getting the balance right between introducing major reform, but also introducing the policy in a way that makes sense and is sustainable over the long term. If we get the policy wrong, those mistakes will simply accumulate over time. So as a result, I'm really pleased to say that we have a very prestigious panel of experts to actually help us address some of those big policy challenges about how do we implement policy, how quickly should we implement reform, and in what format should we do that. And if I can start by introducing them, first of all, on my far left, not politically speaking, the far left in terms of his position on the panel, is Chris Curry from the Pensions Policy Institute in the UK. Chris is a well-known expert on pension policy. He really is one of the acknowledged experts. And I would take advantage of his expertise before the UK is kicked out of the European Union before long. So grab him while you can. On my near left is Mady Delvaux, who's one of a very well known MEP in the Parliament. And then on my near right we have Dr. Susanna Kochskämper from the Cologne Institute for Economic Research. And on my far right, again, not politically speaking, but is Dr. Josef Woess, who's from the Europa, and he's the head of the social policy unit there. Now, in terms of format, what I'm going to do really is I'm going to get each speaker to spend 5 minutes setting out what they think are the big issues around this debate. Then that'll be followed by a moderated discussion of 25 minutes, where I'll ask them a series of questions and get them to debate the questions, and then we'll round off by taking questions from the floor for about 20 minutes or whatever time we have left. Now, without further ado, what I'd like to first do is, given you're the politician, Mady, yes, I think we'll ask you to start. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the invitation. And well, as introduction, I wanted to say that I belong to the lucky generation, and I grew up with the theory of the three pillar theory, and I must confess that I used to be a very strong advocate of the pay-as-you-go pensions, especially Bismarck system. But it implicates strong state intervention and high replacement rate. And what I liked about it is the solidarity between generations. But of course, I know also it was not perfect, because you extend the inequalities of work life, you extend it to pension life, and it was not very favorable to women, especially in the period where women did all the unpaid works and had no rights to pensions. Then I had to get familiar with second pillar pensions, and my experience at least was that it worked well in big undertakings and with strong unions. Then it is really fine. And I neglected third pillar. Well, maybe I should say that I was Minister for Pensions in Luxembourg for 10 years. So I have some experience in this field. Third pillar was for me for people who had a lot of money to spend, and so it was nice to have, but not absolutely necessary. So, but today I believe we have to rethink on all this issue. I see the problems our our society is facing with an aging population. I can repeat your figures. For people in working life for 1 over 65, and this will be in 2060 only 2 people working for one person over 65. The life expectancy is growing. I was always told that when Bismarck created his regime, retirement age was 65 and people died, life expectancy was 68. And anyway, many workers died before and they never had any revenue from the system. So the stress to the first pillar pensions is of course that it is on a political level. At this moment, I think it's impossible to increase the contributions, the level of contributions to the pension system. It's very, very difficult to be less generous in the pensions because in some member states the level is already very low and we face an increase in poverty of elderly people. So, of course, now it is, the new idea is that we have to encourage people to invest in personal pensions. Well, I believe this is a solution for some people if the product is safe, if it is not too expensive, if the return on invest is interesting enough, and it is not always in the existing system. And I believe it will not work without tax incentive. This is of course a problem at the European Union level because tax is exclusive competence of member states. But I do not see how this system can work for people who earn a minimum wage if you have to struggle to, or even many young people I meet who have to struggle to find a job. Who migrate from one traineeship to another traineeship. I don't think that they are concerned about the level of their income when they are retired. So many people, I think, are not ready for this personal pension unless we make a big information campaign and insist and give incentives. But my main message is that I do not believe that we can solve the problem of pensions without a contribution of solidarity. And I'm always astonished because we have no problems to discuss on tax exemptions. This is very politically correct. You have tax exemption. But this is money that goes not into the budget. But to take money out of the budget, this is not politically correct. So I do believe that we have to think in a new way. And I would agree that we have to start now because pensions is an issue of long term. And we have to prepare our populations. If I can just only react to your presentation on jobs at risk, I agree that there are studies most of the studies say that jobs will disappear. This seems evident to me. But we do not know how many jobs will be created. And this is, of course, the imbalance in the political discussion. So, well, I hope that many jobs will be created and that at least we will save a first pillar element in our European society, because I believe this is what makes Europe so unique, that we have this solidarity intergeneration, but also between well-off people and less well-off people. And if we don't want to increase poverty, the gap between the poor and the rich, I think we have to make a big effort on pensions.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Susanna, can we hear from you next? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, well, I thought I also was invited to present some of our findings from a study we did like 1 year ago. And it was about the role of the European Union versus the role of the nation states when it comes to pension policy. And so we took a closer look at also the developments and found that, yes, there are there is the demographic challenge, and it's the same, or it's like in overall Europe, you have some developments which seem on the first view the same. But if you have a closer look, you see that the demographic challenge differs through Europe. You have some states where the old age dependency ratio is developing faster than in others. The level is different. Just for an example, if you see Germany has an old age dependency ratio of around 35 at the moment, and it's projected to be 65 in 2050. Spain starts on a very low or on a lower level, 29 today, or 2015, and it's projected to be 73 in 2050. So if you think about it, like Germany, it goes up, the old age dependency ratio, but in Spain it's even more rapidly, whereas Denmark is in 2050 supposed to be on the level Germany is in 2025. So if you just take the overall picture, you see that also the challenges for the pension policy might differ. And secondly, you have what was already mentioned, different traditions in the pension systems. So if you come from the, for example, German perspective with the Bismarckian system, redistribution within the pension, the public pension system, is a big issue and a big discussion. For if you think the tradition is or was to say you have to work to earn your pension, and if you don't, you get the public support or social service, but not within the pension system. Whereas that's an idea which might be a bit strange to understand for someone from the UK, for example, why you don't redistribute within the pension system, for example. And that brought us to the question, what can Europe do? What do the nation states have to do? So, and we found that a single solution or the solution on the European level might be not possible, for it's so complex to see all the different pension systems, all the different traditions, and that probably the European Union can give advice and can do some benchmarking processes or compare different pension systems, but not introduce one single policy which might be the solution for everything. That's also regarding PEP. I think, well, it's a good idea, but the question is how the populations in the different member states will react, and if they even accept such a product depending on their pension tradition. So, of course, there are some similar politics which might be possible for all member states, like the retirement age, defined entitlements or something. But we think it has to be very careful from the European level to introduce some products or policies which might not fit in the national systems. The same if you look at old age poverty. Even here we have big differences between the states, but also within the states. Just a recent study just showed for Germany that it's not the problem for the overall population to be poor in old age, but you have certain risk groups, and that you have, and so the findings of the study were that you should rather focus on those risk groups than reforming, or not reforming, but then introducing pension policies which might benefit other groups which aren't at risk. For for example, one risk group are low-skilled workers, but reforms of the occupational pension system might even reach them. Why? Because they don't even pay in. So, so overall, the summary of our findings is that yes, pension policy is important. Pension policy has to be mainly done on the national level, and that the European Union can support, can give advice, but shouldn't go too far in single solutions which might not fit for every country.
Oh, thank you, Susanna. I mean, I would like to come back to that at some stage. I think this is a really, really interesting and important point about what can be done at a European level and what should be left to national authorities as well. But we'll definitely come back to that. Next, can we have Josef, please give us your views for 5 minutes. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to this conference. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I'd like to focus on the public-private issue in this first round, and start with the question, what are we aiming for with pension policy? And I think the very purpose of pension policy is to provide people with this decent income in old age. And decent income in old age means two things, I would say. First, poverty avoidance, and then a decent level of wage replacement for middle-class workers. It's also a very important issue. Then there are other key objectives of pension policy like safety, sustainability, and things like this. And now pension orthodoxy tells us that privately managed, pre-funded pension schemes are the best vehicles to achieve these goals. All around the globe, there is a big promotion of expanding private pensions. I wonder what are the reasons for, and is it that convincing what is said in this context? And it's not only the financial industry interested in expanding private pensions, but it's also promoted this way promoted by institutions like the World Bank, OECD, European Commission. Why that? Is it really true that such private pensions are less costly than public pensions? Or the other way around, are public pensions more expensive than private pensions? I doubt. Is it true that, or is it the case that private pensions are less risky than public pensions? No. I doubt. Every type of pensions, in every form of old age protections, there's risk involved. That's evident. Economic risks, political risks, inflation risks, and so on. But with this private pre-funded pensions, the financial market risks come in. And we speak here over a long-term horizon. And I very seldom hear the question or see studies on how sustainable are our financial markets. I doubt, have some doubt. Another question, which type of pension arrangement is more, is better or offers better conditions for avoiding fragmentation of our society? Are these private schemes or public schemes? Which one is better to address risk groups? I would say in a public scheme we can really say, okay, we need some solidarity, we need some distribution there. It's complicated in a private scheme. It's not impossible, but it's very complicated, I would say. Which scheme is better adapted to changing labor market structures? It was very good that you mentioned that we are facing new types of employment, outsiders, insiders, outsiders, and for instance, occupational pensions, are they really addressing outsiders in the labor market? Very seldom. Many of new forms of employment are not are not covered by even where you have such company pensions. So there are a lot of questions in the room. I would say that why is there such a big move towards private pensions? My impression is that the promotion of this way of dealing with the aging challenge and with the pension challenge has a lot to do with intense and very professional lobbying from the financial industry and from private pension providers. Thus, I very much welcome that Finance Watch is addressing this pension issue. And I really hope that maybe one of the results of this debate could be that we come to a more balanced view on how to deal, or how to, where, in which way to orient our pension policy. To really look at the pros and cons of public and private systems, the pros and cons, the strengths and weaknesses, and so on. So that's what I would like to see, and I have the feeling that very often the discussion is not that balanced as we would need it to come to rational solutions. That's not something against private pension or against occupational pensions. They have their room, of course, but I don't think that it's good to substitute, as it is the case in many countries, to substitute public pensions by such second or third pillar pensions. This is a strategy which leads to more fragmentation and to more insecurity and so on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joseph. I mean, again, I think that's a really, really interesting point we should be exploring, because I've often wondered myself whether the trend towards transferring risk and responsibility to individual citizens, is that driven by economic necessity or is it driven by ideology? I think it's really, really important that we have that debate, because we are starting a transfer of risk and responsibility which may well be unstoppable, and we may end up making big mistakes for the future. But it's a really, really important point. And now, last but not least, Chris, who's going to give us a bit of a flavour of the UK experience. I always think this is really, really good, because, you know, I've always worked in the UK, and trust me, if you want an example of how not to do pensions, then you look to the UK. The UK has been the UK is a big laboratory experiment, really, for free markets and things, and we just get so much wrong, But so anyway, Chris, give us a solution, and tell us. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that.
All within 5 minutes.
So thanks for the build-up. It's good to know we still have some uses in Europe, even if it's just as an experimental area for future pension policy. And thank you very much to Finance Watch for the report, excellent report today, and for the opportunity to discuss it here. I am going to just spend 5 minutes or so talking about the UK experience, because I think, as the report points out, and as Mady mentioned, it's important to start early. Well, we've actually started quite a few years ago, so there are some things which we've done which may be of relevance for the rest of Europe. There are three things in particular I was going to talk about, and three big areas of reform that we've been through. In the first pillar, big reforms of the first pillar in what we now call very originally the new state pension, as opposed to the old state pension. And what's interesting there is we've gone back to a much more Beveridgean type system of a very flat rate redistributive pension, which gives the same to everybody. So there's no earnings related element as part of that. Coverage has been increased, so it's expected that about 90% of the entire population, male and female, will receive the same amount in the future. However, as part of the same policy package of making it more evenly distributed, we also put things in place to reduce the cost going further forward. So it's very interesting to see the chart which Christian put up earlier, which showed the mandatory contributions, or the benefits derived from the mandatory contributions in the UK at the very lowest on the chart. We're not expecting those to increase significantly over the next 30 to 40 years because of the policies that are put in place. So the first tier, Pillar 1, is very much a foundation, but a very low foundation upon which pillars 2 and 3 are likely to be built. But fortunately, we've done some reforms in pillars 2 and 3 as well. I'm always slightly worried about trying to work out where the UK fits in, whether it's pillar 2 or pillar 3. I think it's probably pillar 2.5 or something like that. It has elements of both pillar 2 and 3 in it. So the big reform to help people build up income and assets for retirement is automatic enrolment. So this is not the same as compulsory pension contributions through the workplace. But just a change in the way that the system works so that if individuals do nothing, then they do end up in a pension. Rather than having to opt in, they have to opt out. And actually, that's been incredibly successful. So it was first suggested in 2005, first introduced in 2012, and it will actually be fully implemented by 2019. So only 14 years from when it was first suggested until actually being in place, which is relatively quick for pension policy, I think, certainly in the UK. But what that's done is it's increased the numbers of people saving in a workplace pension, increased the coverage of pillar 2 stroke pillar 3 quite considerably. So we now have about 18 to 19 million, probably nearly about 2/3 to 70% of the active workforce now covered by workplace pension compared to less than half in 2012. So there's actually been quite a big improvement in that. It's not perfect. We know that for the 6 million new individuals we've got saving, there are a further 6 million people who are working but not covered due to the definitions and the earnings limits which we put in place. There's a big number or a large number of people, in particular amongst some of the vulnerable groups that I think Susanna was mentioning earlier, low earners, overlap there with women in particular and people from ethnic minority groups who aren't well covered by automatic enrolment. And it has to be said that the amounts of money going into automatic enrolment are currently incredibly low. So currently only a 1% employer contribution and a 1% employee contribution, and not of all earnings, only of earnings above a certain amount, about £6,000 a year. That will go up over the next couple of years to be 8% of a band of earnings, but even that by international standards is incredibly low, and we know that that's not going to be enough in and of itself to get people to have that adequate replacement income based on a replacement rate going forward. So there are also challenges still, even though we think it's working pretty well going forward. One of the good things about automatic enrolment is its use of inertia. We found in the UK that trying to get people to save voluntarily has not been very successful, and I think that's something to bear in mind when you're thinking about using Pillar 3 and getting people to do it of their own accord. Very few people have actually opted out from automatic enrolment, about 1 in 10. So 9 in 10 people who are put into a pension scheme actually stay there, whereas before we only ever got about 1 in 10 in to save in the first place if it was voluntary. So I think that's a very important point. The other reform that we've introduced, it's quite hard to describe why it's been introduced. It's liberalisation of the pension income market in a way. The rationale given at the time was that the market wasn't functioning well. So up until 2015, individuals with their assets built up in a defined contribution pension, either through Pillar 2 or Pillar 3, had to convert that into an income stream, a lifetime income stream through an annuity. There was wide variation in annuity rates. It was very hard for individuals to find the best annuity and to achieve the best income in retirement. So the solution was to say you didn't have to do that at all and you could do whatever you liked with the money. There are some positives potentially from this, in that individuals now have more freedom to match their needs in retirement with the assets that they have. Certainly the reforms have been extremely popular. Individuals are very keen to have access to the money from as early as age 55. They always felt that income for life, the annuity products, weren't giving them very good value for money for obvious reasons of increasing life expectancy and low returns meant that the rates they were getting each year were getting lower and lower, without really realising what the value of that was. And if you ask them now what they're looking for, they generally want something which is guaranteed and something which will last as long as they live, but they don't want an annuity. They want something completely different. What has happened is that most people who have been through the process since 2015 have not purchased a lifetime annuity. They've taken money out in lump sums, or they've put it into more investment accounts, which they will then draw down. We don't know whether that's the right thing for them or not at the moment, because we don't know what other assets they have. We don't know what they plan to do later in their retirement. It might be they're actually making a very rational decision and will then annuitise later on and convert into an income when they're in their 70s rather than doing it in their 60s when they might benefit more from the mortality cross subsidies. But it's going to take us 10, 15, potentially 20 years to find out. So maybe I can come back in 15 years and let you know whether that particular experiment has improved people's retirement or not.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. And it's interesting, in the UK, the reforms that Chris mentioned are called pensions, freedom and choice, and I mean, to my mind, I'm much more critical. And Chris is a very well balanced man, whereas I'm not, And I think what we have in the UK now is freedom from security and choice of even worse value products. That's already happening. We can see that happening already. So don't follow the UK on that one. Trust me, it is an incredibly bad decision the UK government has made on liberalising the pensions market. Don't follow our example. Okay, well, so now to try and move on to a bit of a debate around this, I'm going to ask a series of questions to try and stimulate some conversation here. Now, the first question I really want to put to the panel really is first of all, what are your views on the policy responses so far? Are we heading in the right direction? Are we going fast enough? Are we going too fast? Are we doing too much too soon? But also, I think Susanna made a really, really important point. I think, and this is really, what should the role of the EU authorities be in pension policy? Should it be limited to guidance, advice, or whatever, or should the European authorities at European level become more interventionist? So I don't know who wants to pick up first on the sort of policy. Mady, do you want to go first about?
I do not at all see how the European Union could be proactive in pensions, because it's very sensitive. It is tradition, and why disturb these systems? We have these coordination rules between member states, and I think this is very important. So to assure mobility, if people move from one country to another, that they have their rights. This is good. But now I see that the proposal to have a European personal pension. Well, this could be an alternative. I think it could be interesting for. I don't know many, but some people who are mobile in the European Union, and I think their number will increase. So this is an interesting product. But I think the institutions, they can allow the exchange of good and bad practices, and push maybe member states to have real debates on the problems we are facing, because normally. Governments do not like to discuss these issues because it's very, very tricky.
But do you think are we going in the right direction? Do we need to do much
do
more?
We go to any direction?
No direction.
I don't see a direction. I'm sorry, but I see debates and not far-reaching, because we turn always around the same topics, but I do not see action.
Yeah, okay, so there's plenty of talks, no action?
That would be my statement, yes.
Okay. So, Susanna?
Well, I'm not so pessimistic. I think, of course, there's a lot of talk, but in some member states, or as far as I see, there is some movement in probably the right direction. Then, of course, we have to think about how to finance pensions in the future. So, on the first pillar, there is some movement. And I think, I don't know if the big advantage of the European Union is all the committees and all the talking, or is just that you have on a very small place so many different systems so that you can compare. What I, for example, found quite interesting was that recently the Finnish, I think it was the Finnish Pension Policy Institute, or Finnish Institute, whatever, they published the retirement ages throughout Europe. And so suddenly we had in Germany something like, okay, look, the Finnish, they can work until they are 69 in 2050. So why can't we? Why do we stop at 67? Of course, it's just an idea, or just but you can, suddenly you start to compare different approaches, and you can bring them into your own political discussion and think about if if that might be another way, or if that might be a way. On the other hand, for example, in Germany, we introduced, I don't know how common knowledge this is throughout Europe, people get, by the public pension system each year, they get the information about how their entitlements will be when they retire, what amount. And just recently it was evaluated, and it seemed to be that that this was one step into more private saving and into more thinking about how the retirement period will be. So people started to save up more. That was one of our not us, unfortunately, but another economic research institute found that this was one little step, just which might be copied by other member states. Why not? So there is a lot of talking, but there's also some action.
Some action, so slightly
step by step.
Slightly more optimistic.
Slightly.
Yeah. And Joseph, are we going in the right direction? Is there a role for the European Union in coordinating policy?
Regarding the role of the European Union, I fully agree with what Susanna has said. I think there shouldn't be really much direct intervention. The systems are much too different, and that's I think it would more or less it's impossible. Nevertheless, it's very important what the European Union does to a certain extent. Me personally, I appreciate reports like the aging report or the adequacy report, and in such directions, reporting, giving information on practice here and there on what reforms have been done. That's important. That helps us in each country, I think. But I wouldn't say that the European Union should really guide in which direction each member state should go. Regarding the direction of reforms so far implemented, I think it's very different from country to country. As far as I can say from the Austrian experience, we had a lot of reform regarding our public system, and I think altogether it wasn't bad what we've done. So in the long term, we even for youngsters, we offer rather good replacement rates through the public regime, and we see that the key challenge, and I think that's maybe in every system, the key challenge regarding the future is, or not the only one, but one key challenge: the labor market. Whatever pension system we have, the labor market is very much matters a lot, and depending on how good or bad we integrate our youngsters, our women, our immigrants, and so on in the labor market, that will impact on the future situation in pensions. So at the moment, I think we in Austria, we've done maybe not enough, but I would say we've done enough for the moment regarding our public pension schemes. But now we really have to look at the labor market. And regarding second and third pillar schemes, the Austrian experiences are not that good. We had really huge impact of the financial crisis 2008-2009, with some of our occupational pensions were reduced by about 20% from one day to the next. That was a shock for anybody concerned, of course. Private pensions, we have a kind of state subsidies to one of these systems called Prämienbegünstigte Zukunftsvorsorge, for those among us who speak German. This state premium to this complicated instrument was halved a few years ago, because no one really was against it. That was interesting, really a dramatic thing. The government halves the premium, even for those who had bought this product, and they still pay their contribution. The state premium was reduced by 50%, and no one was against it because no one is convinced that it's a good product. So, from our perspective, and I think it's maybe that's what I tried to say in the first round, we should maybe also a bit rethink the public-private mix, not only to focus on public, of course, but maybe in some other countries it would also make sense to rethink. Maybe we should strengthen also public schemes.
Okay. Chris, what do you think? I mean, particularly on the role of the European Union, there isn't much support for big interventions, but should it be limited to, PEPs, encouraging flexible third pillar products, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to comment on what the role of the European Union should be from a UK context.
Please let us back.
But I think that there are certainly some things that can do. I mean, product development is one, and products which work across borders is obviously a positive thing. Even for the next 18 months or so, it would be useful. But generally, I mean, I think there's a role to play. What's difficult is there's such a wide range of experience in Europe. Partly UK is an outlier from most of the others, but it's not always that same way. But the problems which they're all facing are very similar. Even from slightly different ends of the spectrum. And the solutions, although can get really complicated in the detail, at the high level, they're pretty simple. You either young people have to pay more in, older people have to take less out, or you change the balance about when you pay in and when you pay out. There's not really many other options than that. But it's interesting to look at how different countries deal with it in different ways. And I think maybe that's not a bad idea for different countries to deal with it in different ways, because they all have different cultures, different systems, different labour markets, different health issues, all these kinds of things. Looking at it, I think kind of there is, I think, as was pointed out, a really interesting discussion about the appropriate balance between public and private, and pay-as-you-go and funded, because that affects all kinds of different issues, such as risk, such as intergenerational solidarity. You wouldn't want everything based on market risk or everything based on political risk. You'd want some kind of mixture to make sure that you're going there. That the private sector is very bad at redistribution, whereas the public sector is very good at redistribution. So you might want to think about the different roles that you've got there. But I think one of the key issues here, which the old age dependency ratio has come up a lot today, and I think one of the solutions or one of the challenges has to be just shifting that ratio, not by anything to do with demographics, but just the way we measure it in numbers. And having 65 as a cut-off point, it feels to me to be increasingly artificial as we get increasing life expectancy, as we get innovation and changes in the labour market, as we get increases in healthy life expectancy and health improvements. Actually, the biggest challenge is almost a perception challenge amongst today's population, that they now think that 65 is old. 65 is when you stop work, when actually if people, or paid work, generally, I think people, if it's not paid, they don't consider it to be work. But you're right, there's a lot of volunteering, a lot of informal care in the UK in particular that happens. But actually, trying to change people's ideas and perceptions of thinking, well, actually, my grandparents, when they got to 65, couldn't work, so why would I want to work when I'm 65? And actually think about what their lives might be like in 20 to 30 years' time, rather than what it was like 20 to 30 years ago, is a real challenge. And just as an example, from the UK perspective, we had a really thorough independent review process from 2003 to 2005, a pensions commission, which actually worked incredibly well at building up political consensus around the challenges facing pensions and what some of the solutions were. And at that stage, there was a really strong consensus that one of the solutions was an increasing state pension age over time. And we now have in legislation a formula which means that as life expectancy increases, state pension age increases, not by the full amounts of increases in life expectancy, but about 2/3 of it. But what was fascinating, you may have noticed we've had one or two votes in the UK recently, and the kind of general election that we've just had, it was fascinating that for the first time in 2 or 3 elections, there are actually differences between the political parties about state pension age, and 3 of the major parties were campaigning that they would not increase state pension age further. Whereas all the evidence, we just had a big review, suggested that there would be further increases in healthy life expectancy, and in order to keep affordability, people would be expected to be working longer in the future.
Yeah.
So don't underestimate the political risk involved in all of this as well. It can change very quickly.
That's the thing. Okay, thanks, Chris. And can I just develop this point about the balance between pay-as-you-go and capital-funded pensions? I mean, there seems to be a kind of a consensus that some form of hybrid model may be the best way forward to achieve that balance of security plus flexibility and growth and what have you. But what I'm really interested in is the issue of intergenerational fairness in this one. Now, if we do have a hybrid system or we move towards a more pre-funded system, do people think that this will help intergenerational fairness, or will it actually make intergenerational unfairness worse? Mady, what do you think about the politics of it and the sort of the fairness issues around the transfer of risk?
Anyway, what I miss on this table is a perspective from our colleagues from the new member states, the eastern countries. And I believe, Josef asked the question, why don't we trust more in private pensions? And I believe it's, of course, because of the lobbying of the industry, but it's also because of the lack of trust of all the citizens into their governments. Mm-hmm. And this has an influence on the political discussions we have in, at least in the European Union, because you do not trust that states are better in distribution than private sector. And so I also wanted to bring this argument. About the fairness between generations, I don't know. Frankly, I don't know. I thought this public, this pay-as-you-go system was very, in this perspective, it is fair, because the young generation pays for the older generation. But this is maybe a romantic view on former times when people, when they were aged, were not very, well, they were sad and they were grey and they were sitting at home. And now you have these pensioners who travel around the world, and the young people want also to, at 65, to profit of this sunny side, and want to have all the opportunities, to have the money and the pleasure.
Yep.
So I don't know how to handle this. Unless you put more money into this. But then, on the other hand, you have to ask: is it fair that so much money goes to the elderly people, and that we have young families who live in poverty, children who live in poverty, and who have no perspective? Does it go only one direction? There's also a direction from the elder people towards the children, no?
Well, I mean,
solidarity is a difficult issue.
I'm really pleased that I'm a kind of a policy wonk, and I'm not a politician. So we leave all the big, difficult decisions to politicians. Susanna, what do you think of it? I mean, moving from pay-as-you-go to capital-funded addresses one form of intergenerational unfairness, because younger people don't have to carry on paying for the older population. But at the same time, if you move towards a more pre-funded system, you expose people to more intertemporal risk. If you retire when the stock market's high, you do very well. If you retire 2 years later when the stock market's low, then you're stuck with a bad income for the rest of your retirement. So how do we get that balance of fairness right between security and flexibility?
Well, that's not an easy question, because I think one thing what is out of the question is that you have to have always this security net of the states, and that's something also. I think each society, in the end, each society has to define how big this net or this social security level will be. And so I can't speak for Europe. I can't even speak for Germany, because that's still in the discussion. I find it quite difficult to discuss intergenerational fairness, because you have this thing. You have maybe some older people who always provided for their old age, who could provide for their old age because they were high qualified, and you have these younger people, maybe low-skilled workers, who now are supposed to pay for their pensions. So it's more like, and also it's intergenerational, but it's also between the more or the rich and the poor, or the redistribution on the horizontal level. So so it's not easy to answer. But one thing is also that I think you also have to think that also health systems are pay-as-you-go systems, and we recently did calculation, and we came to, for Germany, where it's, you know, you have taxes, but you also have social contributions for the pensions and for health systems. So we came to around, in 2050, probably 47-48% of your earnings go only to pensions, health, and long-term care, without taxes. So if you think about it, then you probably have to discuss this intergenerational fairness. If you tell people, okay, look, in 20, 30 years, if you want to have the same level of social security as the people who have today, you have to pay more or less half of your income for it. And that's for the older generation. So probably you have to have some funded elements in these systems to stop this kind of redistributions. Because solidarity is also two ways. It's also the older with the young, not only the young with the older. So, but yeah, the answer is not easy.
Josef, what do you think? I mean, do you think it transfers too much to the capital funded, or you were the one who raised this issue of risk and danger involved in capital funded pensions?
I would like to start with some words on the dependency ratio, because it matters a lot in this context. I think it's very, very important not to misinterpret poor demographic data. Age alone is not very eloquent. The number of people in a specific age group compared to another age group, as it is said, when we have at the moment, we have this 4-to-1 relationship, and then we will have in the future 2-to-1. This is poor demographic, but misinterpreted very often as a relationship between contributors and beneficiaries. But it's two very different things. And it's very important to see this, because if you don't see this, then the only way, what Chris said, you have to look at the retirement age, at the age threshold between these two age groups. It's one way, but it's not the only one. And if you look at it from an economic perspective, if you look at the economic status of people, you see that among those of working age all around Europe, not more than about 62% are really in employment. And we have millions and millions of unemployed, of underemployed, of pre-retirement, of invalidity pensions, and so on and so on. The real number at the moment at the European Union, the relationship between those in employment relative to those getting a retirement benefit is 1.7 to 1. That's the reality we are living in. And if we look, we see this reality, and we see this coming change of the age structure, we see what can we do then to intervene regarding this economic dependency ratio. We have to look at all age groups. We have to look at the youngsters. We have to offer them the possibility to integrate the labor market. We have to look at to reconcile employment and family life, at health protection during employment, at all these things. Of course, also on the retirement age, of real actual retirement age. But I think it's very important to have this broader view, and not only to look at age, because look at countries like Algeria or wherever, or Egypt. It would be wonderful there. They have millions and millions of people of working age, and very low number of people at retirement age, but a catastrophe, because no one is in employment. Yeah. So if we look at this intergenerational thing, I think it's very important to look at the labor market. Sure. And so we see they're all sit in the same boat, as we say in German, the older and the younger. If the young people have good jobs, then it will not be that problem to finance decent pensions. And if it's not the case, of course, in whatever pension system we will have big problems. So we have to focus on the labor market, on employment, on quality jobs, and on decent pensions, and an integrated strategy to overall.
Okay, great. Sorry, Chris, I'll give you the last word before I take questions from the...
Very quickly, I agree completely. Participation is really important at all ages, up to and beyond whatever age you decide is the cut-off point. And without that, you really are stuck. And I agree that the intragenerational differences are just as important as intergenerational differences. You see big inequalities amongst age groups, not just within age groups, not just across age groups. The one point I'd make about the intergenerational stuff, because it is incredibly complex, and I'm not sure it's really fully studied in the best way, is that it's dynamic. So it's not just you have an older generation and a younger generation. Today's younger generation will eventually be the older generation, and there'll be a younger generation behind them. And funding's not a panacea for that, especially if you already from where we're starting from. Because just take an example, that there's a lot of discussion in the UK at the moment about state pensions and how they're increased over time. And an argument being that it's unfair to increase state pensions from their low level because the younger generation have to pay for it and they can't afford it. But if you then decided, actually, we're not going to increase state pensions, then for that younger generation, true, their social contributions now would be lower because they wouldn't have to pay so much. But then by the time they get to be the older generation, the pensions they get from the state are that much lower. So what they have to do, they have to pre-fund by saving more themselves in order to end up with the same income they would have got if the pension hadn't been reduced. So they end up paying the same, just a different mixture. So we really need to think carefully about what the right mixture is between what the state provides and what we save in the private sector, rather than using pay-as-you-go as a shorthand for being intergenerationally unfair and funded as the only way to make sure there's fairness between generations. It's much more complex than that.
Very, very good point indeed. Now, we have time for a few questions. Anyone like to ask a question?
No.
Also do a remark or just questions?
Yes.
Yeah. For remark, as long as it's short. Yeah.
I would like to address two points. The first one is when it comes to the first pillar. I think when we look at the figures, usually when you see the replacement rates, you see the replacement rate for somebody who has worked 45 years in a row, full time at average income, and that I think should not be our main focus. Our main focus should be on the persons who do not manage to work 45 years full-time at average income. And these people should be the ones that should have a decent pension when they retire. And that is something which I think you in UK, with your reform, actually managed reasonably well, whilst we in Germany, we have huge problems at that. That is my first remark. The second remark I have is when it comes to your question, what should Europe do? I think, of course, Europe should not intervene into the first pillar. That is much too complicated. But to offer a private product or a product for the third pillar, which is sort of really consumer friendly, and takes the best example of what we have in Europe, like for instance the Swedish product, and let us in the other countries invest into something which exists in Sweden and which today we are forbidden to invest into. I think that would be quite a nice reform.
Interesting. Any views on that? No?
We can agree.
You can agree? Oh, that's good. That's good.
If that depends on the product.
Yeah.
And I want nevertheless to repeat that it is not for everybody.
Yeah.
Because everybody cannot afford to invest in this.
Absolutely.
So that's why we need the first pillar. And I wanted to comment on Josef's remark. I think we also have to, when we speak about pay-as-you-go pensions, in our tradition, Germany, Austria, Luxembourg, it is all, the contributions are all based on the earnings from jobs. We can also find new sources of financing. If jobs are reduced and if we have unemployment, then why should all the burden for the pensions and the social security be on the jobs?
Fully agree.
Yeah. That's easy to say, but difficult.
Any other questions? Oh, sorry, at the back.
What I'm missing is in the discussion is some comments concerning the basic income. Could you just give us some comments and some opinion about that?
That's really helpful. That was the third question I was going to ask, but I ran out of time. So I'm really, really pleased you've done it for me. It's right. That's a really good subject. What do we think of the universal basic income? Chris, start with you this time.
Difficult from where we're starting. I can see the attraction. If you're starting with a brand new economy, blank sheet of paper, it could work. Interestingly, I think the new state pension in the UK is actually close to that for the retired population. So it's getting, once you are over state pension age, there is the same income support supplied to everyone, so there are some similarities there. I think politically it's very difficult. For the past 7 years, I think in the UK there's been a project going on to just look at merging tax and national insurance together, which I think is probably no further on than the day it started. So trying to have a major reform to the tax system to bring in something like a basic income as well, I think is at the moment just beyond politicians.
Yeah. Mady, what do you think? I mean, it's a very attractive idea in principle, but is it possible?
I proposed a debate on the general basic income in my report on robotics, because if the scenario realizes that there will be massive unemployment, then I think we have to reflect on new ways how to assure decent life to citizens who do not find a job anymore. Maybe this will not happen, but it would be good if we were prepared to it. So I do not know how to realize it, and that's why I think we would have to monitor what is happening in the countries who have pilot projects. We should have more expertise on it. How exactly could it work? Very basic income, or what level of income would we need to make it operational? But I suppose it was a very bad idea, but because the European Parliament didn't agree on having a debate on it.
That's disappointing, you know?
Yes, that was, for me, it was very disappointing. I didn't want to introduce basic income, but at least I think we should look closer at it and have more expertise on it.
Susanna,
but the debate is not closed, it will go on.
Do you think it's an attractive idea in principle, but is it possible, given the other cost constraints and cost pressures?
That I think is the main problem with the basic income. The costs and the financing question is one thing, because the research, so far as I know it, if you calculate how high the income has to be and how much it will cost, you come to very high taxes for. So the second question is, the basic income might not solve all the problems, or how. Let me see. In Germany, for example, you have this social security income, but it's different for if you have different needs. So, like a basic income, like on the would not be enough for all the needs. But if you have it as high that all needs could be fulfilled for for all those with the special needs, then it might be you can't finance it in the end. So, I don't know if we shouldn't focus on the risk groups. I mean, if that wouldn't be the first step, just to think about how could we redistribute, how could we deal with exactly those, and I mean we know about them. It's the single mothers, it's the people with the low skilled workers, it's immigrants. Most of them are part of the risk group. So maybe we should more focus on questions. How could we? What could we do for them?
Yeah. Okay. And Josef, what do you think?
I think it's very important what Mady has said as the basic of such a discussion, to have a situation with very high unemployment rates and constant high unemployment rates. I think we should do everything to avoid such a situation. That's the first task, I would say, because a society where we have maybe 1/3, depending on what others give to them, that would never be good, I think, in which way we ever would organize it. So I think the first thing is really to avoid such a situation and to focus on, as you said, on risk groups to help them to make their living, to be integrated into the labor market, or to get something outside if it's not possible. But I wouldn't say we should accept the idea of, okay, we have a large group of people not having no opportunity to enter the labor market, and then we change completely our system and realize this idea of universal basic income. So I think labor market integration and help for risk groups, that's the way.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's a very, very challenging issue to end the panel session with. I do apologise, we've overrun and I've kept you from your coffee yet again due to my terrible chairing of the panel. But just going to ask you to show your appreciation for the panel. I think it's been very, very stimulating.
Thank you.
Thank you.